Hey Mama, thanks so much for tuning in today. A quick apology. I did miss last week. If you are following along in my health journey at all, you will know that I was getting a pelvic vein procedure done last week and I did not batch. I did not plan. I thought I'd be able to get this out next week, and obviously I did not. So, apologies if you noticed that I did miss a week, but I have got some good stuff in store for you coming up. I've had such a pleasure chatting with a few guests I'm going to have on the show in the future, and one of them is today. This show is definitely for the mamas. I have an awesome doula on the show today, Kristen Revere, who is just going to help highlight a lot of the services that doulas can provide, the importance of having support in such a crazy life-changing experience like delivery and especially postpartum. That fourth trimester is such a cloud and everyone's keeping their eye on baby and very few people are keeping an eye on mom, and postpartum doulas can be a huge resource for that fourth trimester, especially if you are feeling the baby blues or just overwhelmed and don't know where to go for support. Doulas can be such a great resource. And so I'm so thrilled to have Kristen Revere on the show today. She is the CEO and founder of Gold Coast Doulas, birth and postpartum doula agency in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She is an elite certified birth doula, a newborn care specialist, childbirth educator, and an elite certified postpartum doula. She co-hosts the Ask the Doula podcast and co-created the Becoming a Mother course. Kristen co-authored the book Supported, Your Guide to Birth and Baby, and she is just such a kind spirit. She is a wealth of knowledge. You can just hear her passion in the show for helping other women, and I cannot wait for you guys to hear more. So let's just dive right in with Kristen. Hey, I'm your host, Dr. Desiree Cassell. I'm an orthopedic and pelvic floor physical therapist specializing in women's health, aka pelvic floor. I'm a wife, mom of 3, foodie, lover of all things movement and nature, and I'm super passionate about educating, empowering, and supporting other women like you to find and maintain balance throughout all aspects of their lives, without pain, pressure, or peeing their pants. And this is the Balanced Momtality Podcast, where we will talk about all things pelvic floor, your core, and optimizing your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum recovery, providing you with the knowledge and tools so that you can feel like the strong, playful, and happy mom that you and your family deserve. Now let's get you out of those pads and back to loving movement. Fill up your water, pop in those AirPods, roll out your mat, and let's connect. Before we start today's episode, just a quick disclaimer that anything mentioned in this podcast is not meant to treat or diagnose any medical conditions. If you have any questions or concerns about your healthcare needs, please seek the care of your medical provider. This is also a safe space where we will be talking about very sensitive but important topics, such as issues with peeing and pooping, relationships, and even sex. So if you have littles around, probably a good idea to pop those AirPods in. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. All right, Kristen, I'm so thankful you took the time out to be on my show today. I know my listeners are going to benefit so much from just your wealth of information and your passion around helping women, especially during pregnancy and postpartum. So I know we're going to get into some really fun topics today, but let's just start with telling my listeners more about who you are and how you got into doing what you do and how you're helping women out there right now.
Well, thanks so much for having me on your show, Dr. Cassell. It's lovely to be here. And my story, I had children later in life, never imagined that I would want to focus on women's health as my passion. But I've always been, my dream has been to support women in different capacities. And I worked in politics before having kids. So I was a political fundraiser. And my passion there was to get women not only elected to office, but to feel confident raising money. And so I was working on the governor's campaign during my pregnancy and thought that it would be easier to assemble my dream team And because I was older, first time mom, many of my friends had kids, much earlier than I did. And some even had high school age kids. And so the information they were giving me was a bit outdated as I was trying to find classes and providers. And I wanted an unmedicated hospital birth. And my husband he has a daughter from a previous marriage and had a different experience with that birth. It was an emergency cesarean, and he had a lot of fear when I talked about wanting to take natural childbirth classes and switch from an OB to a nurse midwife, which I did early in pregnancy. And so we dealt with his fears as well as my own plans, which were different than a lot of my family members, for example.
That is I love that, coming into not just the reality of having to navigate your own fears and, being a first time mom, no matter when it is scary. And then you add in those partners' fears, and they're all so valid. And I think navigating, especially as a new mom, navigating pregnancy, at least personally and with the women I've worked with, it's come really apparent, just how it's so overwhelming because there's so many different places of information coming at you, from the obvious ones like the internet and social media, but then your family, your mom, your husband, your friend, and then your own personal values and desires and goals. And I think ultimately, it comes down to educating yourself to really be that advocate and know what you are feeling you need to do, and listening to your body and what is going to be true, to your values. And having a doula, for example, is so crucial to that advocacy and being able to have your own values and desires communicated during times where you're in a lot of mental overwhelm and pain, honestly. And so that's just such a neat story. And so then ultimately you got into doula work where you weren't in a doula capacity, it sounds like, then when you went through that experience.
No. So I ended up taking Lamaze classes, did not know what birth doulas were in my first pregnancy, and ended up getting into advocacy after my daughter was born. I had preeclampsia, long story short. My daughter was in the NICU for 4 days. I was induced, but I did not have a surgical birth. I was very close to having one, and still avoided most interventions other than a cervical ripener. I didn't have Pitocin. I didn't have an epidural. So I was fortunate in many ways, but my dream of breastfeeding and taking a breastfeeding class and preparing, and then having my daughter go to the NICU almost instantly. Then I was pumping, and, she was given an IV and then enhanced formula, and finally my pumped milk. So I ended up hiring lactation support and, went home without my daughter, and a lot of back and forth. And so my dream of having, visitors and even people popping into my room with questions like the photographer, you don't think of those things. And I didn't have a baby there. And, lactation coming in, and there's no one to help me feed because my baby's in the NICU. And so I really began to have a lot of empathy for moms and got into breastfeeding advocacy immediately after my postnatal recovery period with my daughter, and ended up bringing in elected officials and helped create a rally in my area, joined the local breastfeeding organization, and continued to do nonprofit and fundraising consulting work at that time. And I had my son, my kids are 21 months apart, so I knew what doulas were by that time with the organizing and the rallies and so on. And so I hired doulas right when I found out I was pregnant, and then had a totally different experience. So my son was a quick unmedicated hospital birth, and it was lovely, but there were, a few complications. And he had different lactation struggles. So he was tongue-tied, and so had to get that revised. My pediatrician helped me with that. So I brought in lactation consultants once again. for different reasons, but I did hemorrhage a little bit after delivery. So there was that concern. But again, allowing me to have more empathy. And after my son was born, I had actually signed up for a class during pregnancy to teach these pregnancy and birth prep classes for women, and the birth prep is for couples. And so I took my whole family to Virginia to this training, this 4-day training, and then started teaching classes immediately after the training, and was promoting the class in advance of that. So my students then wanted me to become their doula. So I decided as a hobby, I may take those special students here or there as a birth doula and see how it goes. But I fell in love with the work. And there have always been doulas throughout time. They just weren't a career. It wasn't a paid role. But someone who is able to support and hold a hand and offer physical support, whether it's during pregnancy and the labor or immediately after the baby's born, and mothering the mother and helping with sibling care and food preparation. Like, we've always existed. It's now a profession.
That's just, I love that, because again, being in the world with health and wellness, and I always connected with women and kind of knew I wanted to go down that route, but more kind of in the orthopedic sense with physical therapy, at least. And then I got offered, this training for women's health, and was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll go give it a shot. And just being involved in that community and seeing, how much the quality of life you're impacting and how underserved and overlooked these women are on a regular basis. And
Yes.
it just pulled such a passion into my heart and my spirit to help serve that community. And so I just connect with that so much. And I'm so thankful that you decided to dive in. And are you more full-time doulaing now these days, or what does that look like? What are you into these days?
So I have an agency, Gold Coast Doulas. So I stopped doing postpartum work day and overnight a couple years ago, but I have a full postpartum doula team. Some of them are also newborn care specialists, including myself, and birth doulas on my team, educators, lactation consultants, for sleep consultants. So I'm busy running the business and take clients during certain blocks of the year. Like, I happen to be on call right now for the next several months, and then I'll be off call for a bit. So I do routinely teach a comfort measures for labor class, and I have an online course, Becoming a Mother, that I co-created during the pandemic, that we still do live monthly calls and, recorded videos and workbooks and so on. So yeah, it keeps me busy. I love being, engaged in the work, because my heart is in serving women, but I can make more impact by having an agency and serving more families that I could when I was a solo doula.
Ain't that the truth? I'm kind of on that verge myself right now, where I'm kind of
Yeah.
tapped out, and I'm like, I want to be able to help more women, but I just can't do it myself. And so that struggle to grow, or, because it does shift that role, but it's so amazing that you're doing that work. And you are a host of another podcast, correct? So Ask the Doulas, like, you've got your hands in a lot of things right now. And so I just, again, love all the doula work that you're doing. And I want my listeners to get a better sense of what that doula support looks like. So again, we talked a little bit before the show, before we started recording, how postpartum doula care is such it's such an amazing service. And yet I don't think that that's something people necessarily think of when they think of having a doula. And I know personally, my experience was I did grow up with a lot of, my grandma had 8 kids. My mom had 7 kids. I was around my mom's deliveries. I had my grandma and my mom, who at the time, my grandma had already been to like 33 of my cousins and her children and other people's births. So she was like, they were like my, grandfathered in doula support here. And I knew that doulas were there. And I was like, well, I feel like I have this support through this part of this. So this is good. I'm good with this. But when I got through delivery and was more in that postpartum space where I did have support from them, obviously, but they weren't as geographically close as I would have liked. They were about an hour and a half, 2 hours away. So
Yeah.
I got some support, but not a ton. My husband was great too. But, I went through those postpartum experiences and felt relatively supported, but still struggled because it's a lot. It's a
It
lot
is
to
a
go
lot.
through and to navigate, and you're unprepared. Even though you try and prepare as much as you can, the unexpected usually rolls around. But one of my friends actually got into doula work, and she went straight into the more of the postpartum side. And I didn't even know that was a thing. And at the time I was already, in physical therapy and doing some women's health stuff. And I was so surprised
Yeah.
that, again, another thing I was unaware of, even though I'm kind of in this world. So I know there are so many people out there that have no idea what that support looks like. So if you could just kind of give a general overview of what doulas are and how they support women, but then I do want to get a little bit more detailed into that postpartum role and what that can look like.
Okay. So doulas are non-medical support. And ideally, I guess every doula may have a different passion or training and scope. But generally, we support our clients with evidence-based information and physically, either during labor, pregnancy, or in the postnatal phase. And then as a coach and that emotional support. So as postpartum doulas, that can be hearing the birth story, listening, helping our client process without judgment. So sometimes our well-meaning family and friends may have judgment on how you feed your baby or what you should, how you have your baby or how you parent. And we are there to listen and, of course, give evidence-based information and promote safe sleep, for example, but we will give resources and help create strong systems in the household. And even if it's baby 4, there are still big adjustments in the family, and every birth and baby are different. So there's no manual to prepare you for the situation. So even our most seasoned parents can benefit not only from birth doulas, but also day and or overnight postpartum support.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more because, again, just I didn't know, having someone come in and waking up or being there at night to wake up with the baby and you can sleep, like sleep is number one, and just getting
Yes.
that foundational support when, again, ideally you and your partner might have worked out some arrangement, but then baby comes and it does not typically go as planned. And so in
Right.
those periods where and I think that would be another thing I'm curious about is from your standpoint, for me as a professional practitioner working with a lot of women that are in this pregnancy postpartum realm, but also just for, again, those listeners so they can be more of an advocate for themselves. What are maybe some things that you would look out for as maybe like a yellow or red flag to say, because there's the obvious that we think everyone would benefit from doula support postpartum, but there's situations where it might be extra needed, where it's worth that investment, it's worth getting that care. And are there some things to keep an eye out for that might be a little bit more urgent or worth really diving in and committing to getting that postpartum doula support?
Sure. So, Dr. Casal, I would say, someone who has a history of postpartum depression with prior pregnancies and in that postnatal phase, someone who has a history of anxiety or depression and wants to stay on top of things and prioritize rest, whether it's getting a daytime doula in for a few hours so she can take a nap, or again, hiring that overnight postpartum doula that no matter how you choose to feed can help with feeding, do the diaper changes, help get some sleep shaping, and allow you to maximize your rest. And another consideration would be if your partner needs to return to work immediately and you don't have a lot of family around. You mentioned yours is about an hour and a half away and don't have a big support system, then getting some postnatal planning. It may not be a doula. It could be asking a friend to come over for a few hours if your budget is really tight, or getting help around the house, hiring a housekeeper or a meal delivery service. There are a lot of pre-made postpartum meal companies. Some are local and some are national that can help with that. So figuring out, what is important to you. Everyone's got different goals for not only their birth, but also that early parenting phase. Just like in our book, Supported Your Guide to Birth and Baby, we talk about planning for birth and baby the way you would for other life occurrences, like a wedding or building your home, and picking out the important parts to you and then focusing your budget on that. And that could also be looking into your employer benefits. Many of them cover postpartum doulas, and looking into your options. I mean, even pelvic floor physical therapy, you can get that covered by insurance, or use your HSA and FSA. So what might be covered by insurance? What is important to be self-paid? And what could you ask for as a gift from family and friends? Or registering for gift cards to your favorite restaurants or local kitchens that can do customized meal plans. It could be having a housekeeper or a laundry service, just ways to make impact if you don't have support, because we don't have to do this alone. We are superheroes in many ways, but I feel like in American culture, we are just meant to suck it up after having kids and be strong and don't complain and, look fit in your old jeans as quick as possible and look Pinterest perfect. And it shouldn't be that way. Many other countries and cultures focus on mothering the mother and that healing time of the first 40 days or 30 days, depending on the culture, and caring for the entire family, especially the mother.
And that's really what it is about. I totally agree. Shifting that lens to giving some attention to mom and seeing how she's recovering and just having, like you said, eyes on her and asking for that support, which is so hard. There is so much pressure externally. I don't know why our culture really got to more of that, expecting moms to be able to do all the things while also healing their body and trying to stay mentally sane. And it's just not possible. It's not reality, and we need to ask for help. And that doesn't mean that you aren't able to do it and that you're failing. In fact, I think that's a sign of succeeding, because you're being more aware of where your limitations are, where your overwhelm is, where those boundaries are being crossed, and asking for support, because it is so hard. I don't know why it is so hard in our culture to ask for that support, but it is a game changer. And when you put all that pressure on yourself to do all of it while you're still healing and maybe even in pain, and maybe even you can't even get up and walk around without feeling your insides falling out or you're peeing your pants, but no one's looking at you. No one's looking at you. All of the focus is this tiny human, which, yes, we want to make sure baby is healthy, but we can't take our eyes off mom, because obviously from a physical standpoint, those first 3 to 4 months are so crucial for healing. And so that is when so much can become an issue, even if you had no issues during pregnancy. And we can miss that because we're just powering through and cleaning the house and doing the dishes and trying to get our walks in and bounce back and all the things. But even the mental piece of that fourth trimester, that post newborn cloud, it is a lot. And it's not possible. It takes a village. There's a reason that saying is there. It really does.
It does. And, 6 weeks waiting for that follow-up appointment. There's so much that can go on before that, and support is needed, and resources, like, again, getting that referral for pelvic floor physical therapy, or, finding a therapist if you're having intrusive thoughts. And so it's really vital to be able to understand what's going on with your body and your baby and seek resources if things are off.
Yeah, and that's where I just love platforms like this podcast and your show, because it is where women can just access a lot of that information and educate themselves, and again empowering themselves so they can be a better advocate for themselves but also other women in their village. Because as much as we want to trust our providers, the midwives, the gynecologists, the OBs, it's unfortunate how little they really truly do know and um, prioritize that support and care. They might give you a pamphlet for postpartum depression, but usually at that 6-week check, they're like, what birth control do you want? Are you in
Yes.
any pain? They might not even do a physical examination. And then you're on your way and you're cleared. And it's just so, you trust that provider to be like, okay, I must be good. I must be good to handle all these things then. But
Yeah.
you're not good. And
Well,
even if
I'm,
you're feeling good, it's a
yeah,
process. You can't just hop right in and think that it's all going to be as it was, because it's just not. And I do think
exactly.
that being that advocate is so important. And I appreciate all the work that you do helping educate and empower other women to really know that there's support out there in so many facets. You know, you've mentioned lactation consulting, mental health therapy, food services, pelvic floor PT. There's so much out there and so much more too that can be accessible for women. And it's just knowing and asking, which again is the hard part.
It is asking for help, and there's no shame in that. And certainly, I am a big fan as a baby registry consultant of registering for services instead of all of the things. Half of them you won't use, they may not work for your baby, or they're just taking up space and gathering dust because they're not used until crawling stage or beyond. And so think about the impact that registering for a lactation consultant or those meal services or a housekeeper. And of course, I'm going to plug a postpartum doula.
I love that idea. I am also, being that pelvic floor PT, I'm like, hey, think about the gift certificate for that new mom at the baby
Yes,
shower or whatever, because it is, I get that question frequently, just whether it's with doula, like, should I get one? Or I'm like, well, if you're questioning it, you probably should. Like, because if
right.
there's a thought of, do I need support? You probably do. Because for me, it was more like, that's not a question. I had tons of support. So I was okay. But I'm like, if you're questioning it, then you probably should. But for, things like pelvic floor PT, it is again the obvious thing where I'm like, I think everybody should see
Yes.
one. But especially if you're pregnant and postpartum, this is something that I'm a huge advocate of trying to change that standard of care to where women know that this is something I need to go do, whether my doctor gives me a referral for it or not. In a lot of things, you don't need a referral for. A lot of states
No.
are direct access. You mentioned even insurance coverage. While my practice is not insurance covered, but it's still
Sure.
a service that a lot of insurance practices, you can get reimbursed. You can use HSAs there, and even just other tools you can use that HSA card for. And there's a lot of resources out there and things available that it's hard to think of though in that cloud, right? Like that
It
cloud
is.
is a lot, and you try
You
to
don't
prep
know
for
what
all
you
the
need.
things, but that's why you need someone outside of you, keeping an eye, checking in, whether it's a friend, a doula, your mom, your mother-in-law, right? We need people checking
Right.
in. It's so important. Kristen, I'm so thankful you came on the show. It was such a great chat. And I just, again, love the work that you're doing and the support you're providing to all pregnant and postpartum women out there. And again, I just want you to tell my listeners where they can find you. What services are you offering through your agency and elsewhere? I know you mentioned a book as well. Just let them know. I know that they're going to be interested in learning more.
So, sure. My agency is located in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and we do have some virtual services that your listeners across the country can benefit from. And that would be our Becoming a Mother course, and our sleep consulting is virtual. And then we have plenty of virtual classes, including breastfeeding, newborn survival. I can teach comfort measures virtually, and our hypnobirthing. So the website would be goldcoastdoulas.com. We're on all the social channels as Gold Coast Doulas, and that would be everything from Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Pinterest would be under the Gold Coast Doulas. And then the podcast that you mentioned earlier is Ask the Doulas. We interview experts in the birth and baby space like yourself. And then I co-authored a book called Supported, Your Guide to Birth and Baby, that is all about preparing for not only pregnancy, but also that postnatal phase, and talks about all of the different experts in the birth and baby space that you can bring on, like pelvic floor physical therapists and car seat safety technicians, and looking into cord blood banking or donation and all of your options. And you can choose your own adventure in the book and do more research.
I love it. So many wonderful resources out there. So there is really no excuse. My listeners, go check it out. So much good stuff to learn. And just again, I really, really want to encourage all of you to advocate and educate yourself, because there's so much that we aren't told and that are kind of traditionally passed down through even our grandmas, mothers, friends, that also might not be accurate and helpful. And having resources like this is just giving you more options, more things to take into consideration to really identify what feels best for you. So again, Kristen, thank you so much. And I am sure I'd love to have you on again and chat more doula stuff. But thanks again for taking the time out and being here.
That would be amazing. Thanks, Dr. Casale.
Well, that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day. I know you've got so many other important things going on, but I hope it was helpful and you leave here with some tools to help you in your healing journey. And I just want to ask you, if you have found this helpful, to please leave a review on iTunes. Scroll down to the bottom of my podcast page and leave that 5-star review so it can help other women see this information. And also, if you want to be a part of my community of amazing women trying to balance all the things, great tips and insight and sharing stories and just motivating each other along the way, feel free to join my Facebook group, The Balanced Momtality Wellness and Support. I hope to see you here next time on the Balanced Momtality Podcast.